I think one of the biggest problems, though, is that the producer sends the food to be processed, and the company that owns the process, that processes the food, hires the marketing company that makes the message, right? So I think, and then they're the ones that are telling the story to sell it to the consumer, right? But they're not asking the farmer. And that's why people like Michelle Miller, the farm babe, her, what she's done with Burger King has been amazing, right? So I know we need more voices like that call these companies out and say, listen, what you said wasn't true. The lemongrass thing, right? Like, that's not true. You can't market to these people. They don't understand. And Burger King ended up going to her farm and she educated them. So that, I think we definitely need more of that.
Hello and welcome to Talk Ag to Me, the podcast dedicated to improving ag literacy around the globe. I'm your host, Brandon Black, and in today's episode, we're talking all about how to have better conversations with consumers. To help me with this episode, I have a guest here by the name of Chrissy. I'm going to let her give her own little introduction before we get started here.
Hey, thanks, Brandon, so much for having me. I'm Chrissy Wozniak, and I'm from I live about 5 minutes from Buffalo, so I'm right near Niagara Falls, and I'm on the Canadian side. So I'm from Ridgeway, Ontario, but nobody knows where that is. So, so I'm founder of North American Ag, and I have ChrissyWozniak.com, where I do some consulting with sales and marketing, really process management and media as well. So media, advertising, social media, and all that stuff. So yeah,
awesome.
And it's great to be here.
Yeah, no, I'm happy you're able to come on here. I've been able to look into a little bit of your stuff before we did the episode. You got some really interesting projects going on over on your side with the North American Ag thing. One of the things that really caught my attention was the video that you sent me, the North American Ag Roundtable session that you had, which you could probably explain a little bit better than I could, but was basically a conversation between a bunch of different ag communications people, that do different ag-based media stuff, and you guys had a great conversation about better ways that we can talk to consumers and have those better conversations. Does that sound about right?
Yes. Yeah. So I'll give you a little background on how that was kind of born. So in my pre-COVID life, I pretty much went from town to town, farm show to farm show, and I've been traveling and doing the farm show circuits for, I don't know, probably about a decade now, and kind of comfortable in my routine, and knowing our people and knowing our industry, and doing my thing. And then all of a sudden, just like everybody else, the world stopped, and I was probably on the road, I would say 2 weeks of the month, probably half my time, maybe a little over half my time on the road. So it was a huge shock to me, huge shock. And so what was happening, the people I was used to being around, we we're calling each other on the phone going, what are we going to do? Like, how long is this going to last? Is this, how fast will this 2 weeks go? Right? Like what we were all doing. And then we realized, okay, this isn't going to be 2 weeks. So, and then, farm show after farm show was canceled. And for us, that's where pretty much all of our business came from our marketing came from farm shows. So it was scary, to say the least. And then, my colleagues, my friends, my people in the industry and clients would call me and like, what do you think we're going to do? We're a handshake industry, right? We're a face-to-face industry. Mm-hmm. This is how we've always been, and this is how we're always going to be. And in my head, I'm like, well, I've been trying to get the companies that I work with to adopt more, modern practices, more digital ways of doing things. And I thought, okay, well, I'm in a good place where I know, because we have the technology, we can build what everybody needs, right? So I just started asking questions. I just got on the phone for probably a month and just kept calling and asking questions like, what do we need, right? Like I didn't know, so I had to figure it out somehow. So after, probably about few hundred phone calls, I realized that what we need is a way to have our community, but digitally, and whether that's temporary or whether it lasts, it's something that we need right now. So what the next thing we did is asked, okay, what are the biggest issues in agriculture? And we came, we asked on Ag Twitter, we asked like phone calls, we asked everybody we knew, everybody's opinions, and we came up with 6 different topics. And the one of the main issues that really came up is, how do we bridge that gap between consumer and producer, right? And so that was really intriguing to me, because it really is about marketing. And those marketing messages make me very angry, right? The ones that are misleading, right? Mm-hmm. And like, I don't eat at A&W, like nice. I can't make myself, Mm-hmm. And I know I've heard that they're getting better and stuff, but I'm one of those people who just boycott anyone that is actually lying about agriculture. Mm-hmm. I just can't take it. So and marketers have a lot of power. And, we're the ones that build these messages. Well, if it's not true, then you're actually hurting people. And that's not okay with me. Right. So I really liked, that was probably the one that I was most passionate about. So I moderated that one. So what we ended up doing is we boiled it down to 6 main topics, found a moderator for all of them. I was the moderator for that topic. And then I went and filled, I think 36 panelists. I gathered 36 panelists from across Canada, US, coast to coast, and tried to get a good group of people for each of those topics. And yeah, so we held the roundtable. It was 3 days long at the end of August, and it actually blew my mind how well it went. Like, it was really incredible. And I'm a data person, so I was sitting there watching our analytics, watching all the open rates on the communications, and I was blown away. So I'm like, oh my goodness, we're actually onto something here. So since that, what we've done is we've extended that, and instead of the roundtable, really what North American Ag is about is promoting the incredible people and the incredible products that impact our industry. So, that's why we have like a wellness section. The Best of Ag is about the podcast, because, I think podcasting is a really great media for agriculture. And then Industry Connect, so that you can easily find products. Because we can't go to farm shows now, because we can't, right now it's up to you going to, a producer can go to their local dealer to look for products. And really, they're seeing them on social media and researching things on YouTube. So that's what we've done now, is kind of put together packages for companies where they can be in the places where producers are looking, but also, use what we know about marketing in this age and helping companies, embrace that. So that's kind of what it's all about. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, definitely sounds like you had quite the road to get to where you are now.
Yes.
No, it seems like a really interesting project, and it's I mean, you're absolutely right in saying that the misleading content that consumers are consuming, for lack of a better word, is a lot to do with marketing. It's a lot to do with what's right in front of them, mostly on social media and on TV and stuff like that. And we've, like you mentioned, A&W, we've all seen the ads that some of these fast food restaurants and some of these other marketing commercials are selling to these people, and it's completely inaccurate. It's spreading this information that's not only anti-agriculture, but it's almost making the consumer fearful of their own food, which that should never be the goal.
Right.
And so I think that it's really, really good what, what you're doing, having, that team of people get together for all those different panels that you guys did, and talk about the different topics that you talked about. Like I said, I was able to catch the one that you sent me, which was really, really fun to listen to. It had some really good points in there, some good, interesting conversation to be had. But, as we've talked about previously, this podcast is mostly dedicated towards bridging that connection between consumer and producer on the consumer side of things. I talked to producers as well as in terms of better ways we can have that conversation, but I mostly am conversing with the consumers, doing the translating and that sort of thing. Since you've started this project, since you started doing North American Ag and all those, the panels and the podcast and all that kind of stuff, have you had much engagement with consumers? Do they seem to have any kind of resonation with your content, or is it mostly on the ag side of things?
Actually, can you pause for 1 second?
Yeah.
Somebody's knocking on the door. I'm so sorry.
This is the recording, so we should be good.
Okay. All right. And what's the question again? Sorry.
No, you're good. So, basically, on my podcast, I mostly do a lot of my conversing with the consumer side of things, and a little bit with the producers, but mostly, translating stuff for them. Most of your stuff seems to be conversing with the producer side of things. Do you have much engagement with the consumers? Do they seem to resonate at all with what you're talking about?
So I guess historically, I have mostly worked with service providers and manufacturers that serve the producer. So that's really, I'm kind of a middle person, but can see, when we're at farm shows, we're always talking to the producer, right? But I usually represent the company in the middle, right? Or work for, in my past, I've worked for the company in the middle. So, so I kind of see what's happening, but I don't really have much experience, I guess, with the end consumer, right? I see more of the producer's point of view than I can see of the consumer, except for day-to-day life, right? Which those things that are strange to me, because I live on a small farm. I have chickens, I have hay burners, and so this is normal life for me, right? But I've heard one of my lady that I know, she had at the local fair, she had chickens and some chicks, and it's just a funny example to me of where we are in the world. So she said to me that she had this cage with a hen and some chicks, and this little girl walked up and was like, "Oh, the chicks look so cute. Oh," and they're all huddled up to the hen. And the little girl goes, "Mom, what are the chicks doing?" And the mom said, "They're drinking milk."
Oh no.
Right?
Oh, no.
So that's kind of what I see, is that there is this huge divide where people have personified animals into this weird Disney character, right? Where, you hear, the cage-free chickens. Well, if my chickens weren't in a cage, it takes about an hour before the coyotes come into my yard and eat them. Right?
Right.
So, yeah, so I think there's a lot of realism that's been lost. So, and I think that's, I guess I more observe than work with the consumer. I think that's,
Yeah. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. And I've seen some of the, the things that you're talking about. Luckily I haven't had too many interactions on the podcast like that, but I brought up stories before of, people that, that I've met that have, believe chocolate milk comes from brown cows, or the whole, there's actually some people that don't understand that we have to actually, slaughter animals to get meat from them. I think that we can just harvest it from them, which is an interesting perspective. Or that, like, there's some people that don't realize that cows have to be pregnant to produce milk. Some of those kinds of misconceptions are more common than I would like to admit, in terms of what I've seen. But it's interesting because most of the people I've talked to have been pretty cognizant of that kind of stuff. Like, they don't even realize that that's an issue. Like, I talk about it and they're like, really, people believe that? And, so it's kind of opened my eyes a little bit to the idea that, maybe it's not the average consumer that believes that kind of thing, but it's like just large enough of a percent for it to be an issue. And, that still makes it important enough that we need to not be marketing stuff that could cause that kind of misconception.
that's it.
So do you see, I mean, like we mentioned some examples like the fast food restaurants and that kind of stuff. Do you see anything on like the domestic, like grocery store level kind of that are causing issues to that degree? I mean, I've mentioned labels in the past, but is there anything in particular that you've noticed that causes a big issue?
Well, I just think, the hormone thing is a big
Hmm.
deal, right? And, every living creature has hormones, so you can't have hormone free. I think I've seen a trend toward that changing now, where the labels are saying not added hormones or whatever. And, I think there needs to be a lot more perspective, right? Like
Right.
the hormone level, you know, is is so small that how do you compare that, like
Hmm.
cauliflower could have more hormones than your beef can.
Right.
Right. There should be some better comparisons and better education there. I think one of the biggest problems though is that the producer sends the food to be processed, and the company that owns the process that processes the food hires the
Mhm.
marketing company that makes the message,
Right.
right? So I think and then they're the ones that are telling the story to sell it to the consumer,
Hmm.
right? But they're not asking the farmer. And that's why people like Michelle Miller, the farm babe, her, what she's done with Burger King has been amazing, right?
Hmm.
So I know we need more voices like that call these companies out and say, listen, what you said wasn't true. The lemongrass thing, right? Like,
Right.
oh, that's not true. You can't market to these people. They don't understand. And Burger King ended up going to her farm, and she educated them. So that,
Hmm.
I think we definitely need more of that. And I almost feel like we need that the marketing companies in the middle need to be educated,
Hmm.
right? And I guess those people making those decisions, maybe not the marketing companies themselves, but the people in those companies that are processing the food, they need to understand what the truth is, right?
That's
So
yeah. Huh, that's interesting perspective because we typically think about it as we need to teach people who are misinterpreting the label, and we need to teach the people who are producing the food, but nobody ever talks about the person who's actually making the label. And
right.
that's
Yeah.
actually a common misconception that I've had to address on the podcast before is I've had people come on here and we talk about labels and they say, okay, well, if the labels are misleading, then why do the farmers put them on there? And I'm like, I don't think you get it. The farmers don't put them on there. That's the
No.
point.
Yeah, they don't really know where that food goes, right?
Right.
And imagine corn,
Hmm.
soybeans. They have no idea where that stuff goes. It just
Hmm.
goes, right? They
Right.
drop it off and it's gone.
Hmm.
And Cheerios get some, and right, like it's crazy how what an amazing clockwork our food system is,
Hmm.
right? But to trace it from one end to the other is just about impossible. And there's so much power in the middle.
Yep. Yeah. Well, I mean, just look at the situation that we've had, with processing plants getting shut down over the past few months, how
Yeah,
much of a halt that put on the entire food supply chain. You had consumers paying more and not being able to find food, and you had farmers having to throw out supply. Like that kind of puts into perspective just how essential those middle pieces are to the whole operation,
yeah,
that they can basically control what the consumer sees and what the farmer gets to give out, basically. And so when they control that much power, there needs to be some level of responsibility held up to them on the influence that they have on both sides of that coin.
that's it. Yeah. And I think, like, if you think about everybody's goals from beginning to end, the farmer is like, I need to produce, I need to produce, I need my farm to be very efficient, I need all my equipment to run perfectly, I need this so that I can deliver the goods.
Hmm.
And then the consumer's like, I gotta feed my family,
Right.
and I want my family to be healthy. So
Hmm.
they have completely two different goals. And in the middle, you have a company, which I work with companies. And what do we do when as a marketing person, we sit down and we go, okay, what do you produce? Okay, so they're bringing in soybeans and corn and
Hmm.
whatever, and they're making something to sell for the family that wants the healthy kids, right?
Hmm.
And we sit down and go, okay, well, what's your marketing message? What are you selling? How do you want to increase your sales? How do you want to do this? How do you want to do that? And then we create the message based on where it's going. We're not thinking about where they bought their steel,
Hmm.
right?
Right.
So that's a huge point to me. What I think of is that I don't think that the marketing companies are ever meaning to mislead, but when we work with a client, we're going, okay, well, how can we increase your profit, and how can we broadcast your message, and how can we make your message clear? But we're not thinking about how that steel was refined.
Right.
When it's a product. So I think that's a big point that should be addressed, and I don't know how feasible that is.
Mhm. Do you think that, because kind of what seems to be the issue is the context of the situation, right? So
Mhm.
like just going back to like the label issue, we talk about like the hormone free or cage free or that sort of thing, but we
Yeah.
don't talk about the context of it. Like you mentioned, that some food is going to have more hormones than other, and that naturally they're all going to have hormones because they all come from biological products, or that like the pesticide free label, there needs to be some kind of context in the idea that not all of it's going to be completely pesticide free, because even organic stuff can still use small traces amounts of pesticides. So like, do you think that it would be easier to just provide more context onto some of those types of marketing trends, or would it be easier to just convince the marketers to just not do that at all?
Well, I honestly don't think it's possible to regulate the marketers, because they would need so much education about where those products come from. But I don't know, I'm not one for regulation. Like,
All
I'm
right.
not really a rules person. But if it could help people put things into perspective on the label, then I think that might be a better way to do it. And the other thing is, I love farm to table,
Mhm.
right? Like, I love that. Anything I can do to help farm to table, I'm going to do it,
Right.
because that message from the farm is going to come right through.
Hmm.
Right. So what I would like to see is it become easier to be able to order meat straight from the farm, order your
Okay.
egg from the farm, and I think there, in that way, you can preserve the message better. I guess the only challenges are to keep the food fresh.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
But now if Walmart can do it, we're getting there, right?
Right. Yeah. No, there's definitely advancements in that area. I mean, I'm seeing, at least in my area, a lot more commercial farms that are producing food and basically handing it straight to the consumer. They have some kind of consumer to farmer agreement, and they have like liability contracts and all that kind of stuff that says like, hey, I produce my food safely, and if you buy it from me, then you're not going to sue me for it being bad or whatever. It's like they have like an agreement established to where they can actually transfer that product without having to go through all the processors and the marketers and the distributors and all that middle step. And it seems to be a lot more ideal to the farmer in that situation, because they're not going through all this red tape and running the risk of getting in trouble, because they're solely responsible for that product at that point. They're not sending it off, and then, because like I've had the conversation before where people were concerned about food safety and they like to blame the farmer on foodborne illness outbreaks, when really that's like a percentage of a percentage of a percentage of a chance of that actually being the farmer's fault. Like, it's very, very tiny chance that the farmer did anything wrong, because it usually doesn't even make it that far if the farmer did something wrong. It's
Mhm.
usually either the consumer or the retailer or whoever's the final step of the food chain tends to be where that issue starts to become a problem. So
That's it.
the farm to plate method seems to mitigate a lot of that finger pointing and people blaming other people, and because that way exactly who gave you the product and where it went, and there's no confusion among the middle steps.
Right. And that's exactly, oh, more people are here. Hang on one second.
Go ahead.
Guys, I'm getting recorded right now. I gotta wait till you guys can close the door. My daughter's home today. I'm like, oh my goodness.
No worries.
Uh, um, so yeah, so that's precisely what the problem is. Right now, what's happening is that a consumer is saying, I want health, I want this, I want that.
Hmm.
Then it's driving back to the farm, and the farm is changing their farming methods to suit
Hmm.
what the consumer needs. And I've been seeing it for years and years and years. I'm thinking of this uh, pig farm that I'm thinking about right now, and he got into organic pork, and oh, I think we froze here.
There you are.
Is that better? It froze for a second.
Yep, we're good.
Good. Okay.
Yep.
So the organic pork, when
Mhm.
he decided to go into organic pork, he had to change his entire farming structure, how he did everything, which was really kind of cool too,
Mm.
because they said that it was coming from the consumer. This has to happen. You can't cut tails anymore, right? And
Right.
this is like a crazy thing, was you can't cut their tails anymore. Well, what happens on a pig farm is they chew each other's tails. So
Right.
now what are you going to do? What, we're
Hmm.
going to let them bleed to death, right? So his solution ended up being creating an environment that was as close to being outdoors as possible, and it was amazing to watch this happen. And then he also gave them access to the outdoors, so they could choose whether they come in and out. And what happened? They stopped chewing each other's tails.
Huh.
So I don't believe it's all bad. I believe you can, because these things are running backwards, we can come farther with animal husbandry, right?
Hmm.
And even before that, he wasn't doing anything wrong. He was doing, he was cutting their tails. He wasn't having that issue
Right.
because they cut the tails. But because he couldn't anymore, he did have to change his practices. So it was really interesting.
Mm.
But again, because that the profit is higher in the organic market, he could afford to make those changes,
Mm.
right? So it was definitely backwards.
Right.
So I think the farm to table is the other way, where the farmer can say, this is what we're good at.
Hmm.
This is what I believe in. Now, do you want to buy from me? Do your values align with me?
Right.
So that's why I like it that way as well,
Yeah.
because the consumer isn't always right about how to feed it backwards to the
Hmm.
farmer, right? Yeah.
Right. Yeah, no, that definitely makes a lot of sense. And we have seen that farmers are really good at adapting to regulation, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they should have to. And
Right.
a big thing that I've been pushing for a little while on this podcast, and actually I talked about it with Jason Meadows, the Ag State of Mind host, is the whole idea of humanizing the farmer again. Because that's a big missing piece of the conversation, is the consumer tends to forget that farmers are people too. It's not just some big machine, just making meat and eggs. There's somebody, behind the scenes working, 24 hours a day on their farm. They have a family to feed too. They have bills to pay. Like they go through very similar issues that the consumer goes through. And like the sooner they seem to understand that, there seems to be a better relationship between those two. So I think
Right.
that's another big advantage of the farm to plate thing, is that you actually get to meet that farmer and you get to hear his story, and you understand that there's an actual person behind the face, not just a big machine corporation.
That's it. And one of my pet peeves is just hearing factory farm.
Hmm.
I've toured hundreds of farms across North America, and those giant operations are the cleanest,
Hmm.
right? They care more, like, say, if it's, in the dairy industry, cow comfort is the first thing.
Yeah.
Cow comfort is number one on
Hmm.
a factory farm, right?
Right.
So the consumer has this crazy thought of, this cold, sterile environment that's mean and the cows can't move it. That's not how it really is, right?
Hmm.
Like, if you think about Fair Oaks in Indiana, those cows choose when they go on the parlor,
Right.
right? They are in charge of when they get milked.
Hmm.
The same in any robot barn. The farmer's not making those choices anymore. The cow is,
Yeah.
and they're creating a perfect environment for them.
Yeah.
And I hear those things, and I just go, oh my goodness, I would eat off the floor at Fair Oaks. It's beautiful, right? Like,
Right.
it's guaranteed it's cleaner than my kitchen floor with my dogs at this time of year.
Right.
Right? So, that's the other thing, is that we need to humanize them,
Hmm.
that's humanize the farmer again, and get rid of this factory farm silliness, the animal comfort is important to everyone,
Yeah. No,
right?
that's been a big thing that I've pushed for. I can't say I've had. I think I posted something on one of the online forums that I get guests from, and I said like, hey, do any of you have any questions about farming that I could answer? And I was looking for more guests, and
Mhm.
like within an hour, I had 3 responses from 3 different people, all saying, "Can you explain factory farming to me?" And I was like, "Come on the podcast, we're going to talk about this." So I had like 3 episodes back to back, just talking about how I was like, "Okay, describe to me what you mean by factory farming," because that's a big issue too. Is they like the definition of factory farming is always changing. It's the same problem I have with sustainability. You can never define it properly because everyone thinks of it differently.
Right.
so they would describe it to me. I'm like, okay, well, really what you mean by factory farming is just large scale farming. Like that's not, there's no actual factory where they're just producing this product. Like it's not, it's not a cold
Pump
machine.
it in a cow and sausage comes out on the other side or whatever.
Right, exactly. So I was like, I don't think you guys realize, the larger the farm gets, the more responsibility it has, basically, because because they like to say, like, there's no way a farmer could care for that many animals. You'd be surprised. I don't think you get it. Like that farmer, a factory farm just basically determines how large a farm is, not how it runs its operation.
Right.
If a farmer has a lot of cows and he needs to take care of all of those cows, he's not gonna neglect any of them just because he's got too many to take care of. He's gonna try to do his best to take care of as many as he can. And a big part of that operation is still profit driven. And if a cow is stressed out, he's not going to make any money off that cow.
Well,
So
that's it. It's
makes
counterintuitive.
right. It makes no sense for him to raise his herd to a point where he can't take care of it anymore, because he's going to be losing money at that point. It's just going to be eating food and not producing milk. And so it makes way more sense for him to care as much about his cows as possible. And that's why most operations today, not just in the dairy industry and all animal agriculture, are based around lowering stress as much as physically possible.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
And that tends to be actually a really good, way of going about it. A lot of the consumers I've talked to have been really on board with the idea. They're like, I didn't think about it that way. Yeah, that wouldn't make sense if they try to stress out their cows, because then they would be losing money, and they would be, like you always see like the animal rights activists coming after them, that would just give them more fuel to the fire. I was like, exactly. They don't want that kind of stuff. They just want to make their money and feed their family like everybody else.
right. Yeah. Yeah. And if your volume of production is where you make your profit, you're going to get the highest volume of production, and you're going to do whatever it takes to do that. And if that means you need a happy cow, you're going to make a happy cow.
Right? Yeah, no, exactly.
So, yeah. And that message needs to get to the consumer.
Yes.
100% somehow.
Yes.
But it's tough right now because there are so many activists, and I think the activists are probably too far gone, but I think the people that they're affecting, we need to be as accessible as they are in saying, you're welcome to come to the farm. You're welcome to come see what happens. You're welcome to learn. And, I think that, education starting right from, first grade has to change. My daughter last year had a dairy person come in who told them, how mean it was, and how, dairy isn't really that good for you. And like, I thought that it was going to be something about teaching them about dairy products.
Right.
My daughter came home and said, Mom, I didn't agree with what she was saying. So I said, well, I put up my hand and said, that there's farms out there where the cow decides when it gets milked, and it just goes on when it wants to. And it's like a carousel. And the person that was there said, oh, that doesn't exist. And she was like, It's like, my mom shows me pictures of it. Like, you know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah. So, you go talk to the teacher and be like, what is going on here?
Right.
You don't get, you're responsible for these kids. So, I think that there has to be work done in the curriculum as well, because, it's not happening now, especially, well, not here anyway.
Right. Yeah, no, exactly. And that's an important topic to like we mentioned before, teaching kids as young as possible about, where their food comes from, and not just where it comes from, but how everything that goes into making that food process works, all the science, all the technology, all the engineering, the economic stuff, the regulation stuff, all of that, how important it is, and how not just that, but there's also, there's the other side of the coin too, which is there's a tremendous amount of jobs available in areas regarding agriculture that are not farming, and people tend to forget about that part too.
Right.
But, yeah. So that was actually a big, as far as going back to like the animal rights, or like just activists in general being present on social media, that was a big thing that I had really been pushing hard on my show for a long time, was that, the reason this is so important is because we have been away from social media for so long as an industry. Like, agriculture is so late to the game that we need to do a lot of catching up, because, the animal rights activists and like the other, like the, the anti-GMO people, the all those people have been here a lot longer than us, and they have a lot, they have a lot stronger of a stake in the game. They have, all these videos, they have it like, they have very strong social media platforms built. They have all these, strong followers. And like you mentioned, those are probably too far gone. We're not going to get those back, but it's now our job to play catch up, to try to defend those who are not yet on their side. We have to do everything we can to keep them from getting those guys too.
Right. Yeah.
And that's kind of, I was talking to one of my guests about that, and he asked probably my favorite question I've ever been asked, which was, what can we do? As laymen, as consumers, as people who don't know about agriculture, what can we do? And I basically just told them, do your homework. Don't believe the first thing you read on the internet. Come and ask somebody just to double check, and don't just assume that agriculture is bad just because somebody showed you a picture of a guy hitting his cow, because there are bad farmers out there, and there's also good situations that are taken out of context to look really negative. So just use some logic, use some common sense, and don't just believe everything that you're told. And he was like, okay, well, I'll spread the word about that. So it gave me hope that there's actually people out there who do care enough to not only like do the research, but to defend the farmer at times as well, which was nice to hear.
Right. Yes. Yeah. I always like to use the example too of like the 1960s and the big sugar movement. We've got all this grain. What are we going to do with it? How about we just throw a whole bunch of sugar on it and make cereal? Before that, we had bacon and eggs for breakfast. So then all of a sudden marketing says, oh, this is healthy for you. This is good for your heart. So what are we doing? We're filling up all the kids with sugar before they go to school.
Right.
It doesn't make any sense, right? So we can't just trust the media and these companies that are marketing to us, right? That's not good for you. It's not good for you. It's not good for your kids to go to school full of sugar and then have a crash, and then the poor teachers have to deal with them, right? When they're tired at 10 a.m.
Right.
So I like to use that as an example because, everyone can see that that's wrong, but it still happens. And that was just to sell more grain products and more sugar, right? It was a really high profit thing to sell at that time. And what did they do? They turned us all into cereal eaters.
Right.
Within 10 years, probably.
Right.
Yeah. So, and that's what's happened now with this, organic, hormone, all this stuff, right? And I have nothing against organic. Like, I think organic farmers are doing a great thing. It's the education, right? And that it not being consumer driven that bothers me. Yeah.
And that's an important part of the conversation too, is, we need to prevent any division among the ag industry. We can't be doubling down against, saying that organic is bad by any means, or saying that, anything. Like, people's choices to eat what they want is their choice, and people's choices to grow what they want is their choice. It's just having a better understanding around, the differences between those products and those growing methods, the reason why they're doing what they're doing, and the lack of misconception, like trying to mitigate some of the misconceptions around, if you look at, two steaks in a store, and you see one that has hormone free and one that doesn't, and you assume the other one has a bunch of added hormones to it, and you don't choose that one. It's getting rid of those kinds of misconceptions. There's like
GMO free wheat or bread.
Right.
It doesn't have it. GMO free pineapple. Well, there doesn't have, it's impossible.
Right.
It's impossible
Or
to be GMO. So that should be wrong. There should be no marketer, no company that will put on a claim like that, because it's so misleading. That drives me crazy. Right? It totally drives me crazy.
Yeah. No, exactly. So I think that, like you mentioned, we should, as an ag industry, it might even become our responsibility to talk about how, there's nothing wrong with organic food. There's nothing wrong with GMO free food or pesticide free food. That that's fine if you want to eat that stuff, or if you want to grow it that way. But it's not better than anything else for any particular reason, and that the other stuff isn't bad or toxic or anything dangerous by any means. It's just a matter of, you can do whatever you want. Just understand that nothing out there is going to hurt you.
Right. Yes. Yeah. That's a big point that we really need to let people know about. Huge point.
Yep. So I think at the end of the day, it's just going to become a whole just team effort. Ag just needs to come together as a whole. All the ag communicators need to come together as a whole and just say like, hey, we just need to work together and get them back on our side, and then we can go our separate ways and do our thing. But right now, for the first time in probably human history since the invention of agriculture, we have, half of our population, actually a significant amount more than half of our population, disconnected from their food, from the source of their food, and the other half of it trying as hard as they can to get them back on board, and we're missing the mark somewhere. I mean, I personally think that we're doing pretty good. I think that we're starting to get back into the minds of those who are not around agriculture, but I think we still have some ways to go. It's still an uphill battle.
For sure. Yeah. And you brought up a point earlier about working in agriculture, even though you're not involved in agriculture growing up. And for myself, I didn't grow up on a farm. So I grew up in cottage country, and my uncle had a farm, and I just, like, from the time I was very little, and I just gravitated to agriculture. And that's an important point to know, that there are very good jobs in agriculture for young people. And you don't have to be on the farm, but you can still help in these ways, right? Whether it's working for these marketing companies, it's becoming educated and furthering the message. There are so many jobs in agriculture, and we always need good people. And so I wish that guidance counselors would say, yeah, there are all these jobs, right? There are a lot of jobs in this industry. We probably make up more than half of the jobs in the world in agri-food, right?
Yeah.
And so that's one message to young people for sure that I would have, is that if you have even the slightest bit of interest in agriculture, don't think because you're not a farmer you can't be involved.
Yep. Yeah. And that goes all the way back to like the education conversation, like we were talking, agriculture being more heavily associated in education, being able to have agriculture be part of other curriculum classes, and not just an elective. You can have agriculture associated with math and history and science, and these other things that can get kids interested in. Not only does it get kids interested in the industry, but it gives them a practical application for the things they're learning. Because that's one of the biggest complaints I've heard from students, is that they're learning concepts and they have no idea what to do with them. Like, what am I going to do with calculus? What am I going to do with, this or the other thing? If you give them agriculture as a foundation for that lesson, it gives them a practical use for it. And it may even inspire them to want to use that as a career one day. And I know I talked to people as guests that have been interested in the idea of, pursuing careers in ag technology, or like when they hear that we have a lot of computer and robotic science invested into agriculture, they get really interested because they're studying to be a computer scientist. So like, oh, maybe I'll go into ag computer science or something like that. And so like that kind of, because most of them don't even realize it's an option. If that gets exposed to them as an option, as like, if you want to do what you do, if you want to work as a computer scientist, as a communicator, as a marketer, as, even like graphic design, all kinds of different things, there are available positions for you in the ag industry. Like, people always talk about how there's no jobs available. There's tons of jobs available. They're just in, they're in ag. And it's not a conversation that I think has had enough. So.
For sure. Yeah. Another thing I'm passionate about, getting more of these people into this industry, that, and making it a more welcoming industry for outsiders, I guess.
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. So, I mean, I think that kind of wraps up all the questions I had. I don't know if there's anything else you wanted, any other comments or questions you had, or.
No, that was really great. It's always fun to talk about stuff like this.
Yeah,
it gets me fired up.
Yeah, it's sure a pleasure. I mean, I really appreciate you taking the time to come on here and talk to us about all that. If you'd like to take the chance to plug your website and your project some more, I would be more than happy to give you that chance.
Yeah, so anybody that wants to, if you go to northamericanag.com, you can subscribe. We have a once a month newsletter that kind of highlights a lot of the people in agriculture, and there's some good articles as well. If you're looking for work in the industry too, we have the future of ag, and we have a career section. We also have a section about farm succession as well. So we try to cover a lot of the bases, and really the whole point is to promote the people and the products, and the people that make a big impact in our industry. So yeah, so check that out. And my website for marketing is chrissywozniak.com.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll be putting all the links down in the description so you guys can go check that
Awesome.
out, and I'll be sharing around all the pages and that kind of stuff. Anyone who follows me on social media knows that the entire week I have an episode coming out. I have all kinds of stuff shared out about it, so you guys will definitely know where to find her. So, yeah, thanks again, Chrissy, for joining me for this episode. It was a lot of fun. I definitely enjoyed the conversation. So, I definitely hope we are able to have it, maybe in a follow-up episode or like a future collaboration at some point, because it definitely seems like I have,
Great.
we have a lot to discuss.
Yes. A
That's
lot of work to do.
yeah, that's right. I've been working on trying to get as many ag podcasters and ag communicators together to work, put our heads together and find new solutions to talking to consumers as much as possible. So it's definitely nice to have the connection.
Awesome.
So
Very
yes.
good. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for joining me, and thanks to all my listeners for tuning in. And don't forget, if you ate today, thank a farmer.